Hi, here's a short video about the alignment points in Move Your DNA. And you can follow along on page 226 if you want to take a look at what they're presented like on the page. And hopefully I'm going to lift those off the page and help you to understand how they work while we're moving. So the first one that I think is really important is stance. And that is described as the toes forward and ankles that are about hip width distance apart. And you're going to measure a hip width distance from your ACES bone at the top front of your pelvis. And you could put your fingers on that like so and find those bones right here, not on the side, but right in the front here. And then if you drew an imaginary line down, your feet are going to be about as wide as that at the ankle point. And your toes are going to point forward as much as you can. If that creates some torque that's uncomfortable in your knees, or if it's really hard to stand comfortably without having your toes pointed out a little bit, that definitely is an assessment that shows you some need for being able to bring that alignment back into your body. All these alignments are for the purpose of moving your joints into a direction and a shape that is the most efficient in terms of their use. So if you walk a lot with your toes pointed out, that's going to be doing some rotational forces to your knees and hips that are not so healthy as you're walking. So while you're standing, while you're walking, see if you can point the toes forward and have the ankles at about hip width stance. When you're walking, you can also practice landing your heel about hip width. And just notice as you walk, do you tend to walk in a line? Or can you use the muscles to help you bring some balance and get those heels landing hip width apart? So the next piece of this is hips over heels. And so I'm going to turn to the side and show you that a lot of us will tend to stand with our hips a little bit forward. And where we're going to measure this from is the top of your femur, which you could find by putting your flat hand on the side top of your leg bone and lift that leg out to the side and about where you find a crease between the pelvis and where the top of the leg bone goes. And you might even be able to feel the top of the leg bone through your flesh, but it's not in the pelvis up here, but here down in the leg bone. So we're going to take that leg bone and we're going to stack the legs up and shift that whole leg complex back. So a lot of us stand with our pelvis forward because we're in heels. And in order, when you have a lift at your heel, you're going to tip your body forward unless you do something else to balance out. And usually that's to lean back and send your pelvis forward. So I'm exaggerating, but maybe not so much, depending on how high the heels are that you're used to wearing and walking around in. So from a barefoot standpoint, I'm using my index finger here to show you the top of my femur bone. And when I shift that back, I have to use more of my backside, hamstrings, glutes, and even help balance out a little bit through my calves and down through my feet to maintain that stance that stacks the leg bones on top of each other and offers you that weight-bearing load through the big, strong bones of your legs. So if you are leaning forward a little, even a little bit, you're going to feel the weight of your body on your forefoot. When you shift your hips back, you're going to take the weight off the forefoot and put it on the big, strong leg bones. And then those heel all the way down to your heel where it belongs. Now, when you shift backwards, at first, you may have a feeling that you're tipping backwards. And if that's true, hinge at your hip and bring your upper body forward just a little bit for the purposes of finding that alignment and strengthening the backside. Okay, the next piece of this is neutral pelvis. And neutral pelvis comes in for a couple of ways, and that is if you're shifted forward, you're tucking your pelvis. So imagine that your tailbone is down behind here, and if your tailbone is tucked up under, it's going to shift your pelvis forward. It'll maybe make you bend your knees. It shortens up the hamstrings in the back and also puts a little bend in your low back where you probably don't need it, right? So you're going to untuck your tailbone and see if you can bring the hips back over the heels and come back into neutral. So this can be a little bit hard to find, just like all these bony markers are about the way the bones are inside the flesh. So depending on how much flesh you have in different areas, a lot of times we're thinking of posture as kind of the way we look, right? The way the flesh on the outside looks, and less about how the bones are stacked and being very functional so that the muscles can do what they need to do. So when we think about neutral pelvis, we're thinking about not tucking and not over tilting to the point where we have a bend in the low back here. And the bony markers, as described in the Move Your DNA book, are the ACES bones that we used for the hip width stance. And then your pubic bone down here. And we're looking at lining up these bones in a vertical way so that the pubic bone isn't out in front of the hip bones here, and so that the hip bones aren't out in front of the pubic bone. If you have low back pain, looking for a neutral pelvis is going to be a great way to spend your time getting to know restorative exercise and alignment points. If you find yourself in a habitual pelvis forward shifted stance, coming into neutral pelvis is going to really help. You could lie on the floor and look for those bony markers being parallel to the floor. That's another way to do it. And you're going to have to find this yourself. It's pretty hard to visualize it from the outside without training, but you probably have a sensation about whether your tailbone is tucked under or whether it's able to just be neutral. And this doesn't have anything to do with the amount of flesh that's in your belly. This has all to do with the bones that are inside and the pelvis relationship to the leg bones themselves. Another piece that's going to be really important for alignment, and this is going to relate to your pelvis because we want the ribs and the top of the pelvis to be in relationship to each other. So let's talk about ribs down or ribs neutral. So imagine that you've got this rib cage, and I'm using my hands like that. Your ribs come around the sides of your body and connect at your sternum here. It's like a cage or a bell. And if you tend to stand with a forward shifted posture, the rib cage is going to go up and forward. And that's going to put a lot of pressure into that part of your back, maybe even into your low back. And so one of the things that we talk about is ribs down, which is just simply, just simply letting the ribs drop down, not an abdominal crunch. We're not trying to like change the shape of the rib cage like that. We're just trying to get the rib cage to ring in a neutral way. Instead of ringing forward and pushing the chest forward, we're just asking the ribs to come down into neutral. And so that's also going to help you find the neutral shoulder blades that are described on page 226 as well, because a lot of times when the ribs are thrusted forward, the shoulder blades are pulled back in order to maintain that forward thrust. So practice your ribs down until you can kind of get the feeling of it. And that'll help you also find the relationship between the low ribs here that you can feel probably, and the top of your pelvis that you might be able to feel here. So you'll notice that if I might put my fingers here on this black sweater, if I'm wringing my rib cage forward, I'm increasing the distance here, right? And what I want to do is know when my ribs are way out in front of my pelvis and be able to bring them back home. Okay, the next essential one that I think about in terms of alignment is your head ramp. So many of us are head forward. We're into our devices and leaning forward, thrusting our chins forward. Some of us have progressive lenses that also have us lifting up and looking down through the glasses themselves. And so this is about getting your heavy head, 10 to 12 pounds worth of head, back on its spine, right? So we don't want to thrust the chin forward and put a lot of pressure into the back of the neck and then have to look up and crunch the back of the neck. So head ramp is eyes on the horizon and bringing these ears back as much as you can in line with the shoulders, tucking your chin in and lengthening through the back of your neck. So here's a couple of ways you can kind of play with this. So I'm going to lift my camera to where my head is. And I want you to use your 4 fingers and put that on the back of your neck. And then bring your chin down. And you've got plenty of room in the back of your neck to widen those fingers and then bring them together. When you bring your head up from hanging it forward, just find out whether you tend to bring your head up and then crush those fingers by the way that you're looking ahead, or whether you can bring a head ramp on, tuck your chin back, and have plenty of room still for those fingers to move around the back of your neck. So some of this is about releasing tension in the back of your neck, getting the curve of your neck to not be so extremely forward, and also bringing the chin back in line. So you're gonna do these alignment points whenever you think about them. You're gonna check yourself leaning forward and going back into a head ramp 1,000 times a day. That's how you learn it. That's how you feel yourself being out of it. When you're hanging out and you're standing or sitting, can you find a way to remember stance? Toes forward, ankles hip width, and then hips over heels. Just check whether you're leaning forward or coming back. Find your neutral pelvis by not tucking your tailbone under and not flipping it up behind you, but somewhere in the middle, so that you take the pressure off your low back and bring a neutral pelvis to this stance and hips over heels alignment. Let your ribs come down and then ramp your head. Now, we're not asking you to live there. We're asking you to check in every once in a while and make sure that your body has the ability and availability to move into those alignments of the joints and the bones. All right, 2 other alignment points that are talked about on page 226 of Move Your DNA are the kneecaps neutral and the knee pits neutral too. So what I've done is I've put markers on the back of my leggings here. And those markers correspond with the tendons that you might be able to feel if you put your hands behind your knee and look for those stringy, ropey, strong tendons that are connecting the muscles down through the back of the knee. So one of the things that we think about when we have stance with our toes pointing outward is that those knee pits also follow the toes, and the knee joint itself is pointing out towards the toes. When you bring your feet in, that changes where the knee joint is going to bend, and I'm going to show you that from behind. So standing with your toes out, you can probably look and see where the tendons are. That's where the knee is going to bend in that direction, right? So if we're walking with the toes out and the knees pointing out, that's going to be pretty hard to have an efficient gait that moves us forward. So that's going to make a lot of changes. It could create a lot of pain in your knees. So one of the things that we want to do now is to bring the feet pointing forward and then check and see whether we're able to bend the knees straight forward and straight back. And these little markers can help you find that alignment. Sorry for the butt shot. And that'll be a gradual change to, oops, this one was off. Gradual change to help you find an efficient way to be easy on your knees as you're walking and standing. Let's look at the alignment point of relaxed kneecaps. So a couple of things that you can try is with a straight leg, and this will only work with a straight leg, not a bent knee. See if you can just grab on to the edges of your kneecap and wiggle them. If standing up doesn't allow you to find some movement in here, or if you feel like there's not much movement in that kneecap, you could also take a seat on the floor or on a chair and stretch your legs out and relax your legs, and then see if you've got some movement in that kneecap. You will have to release the muscle of your quads in order to get your kneecap to move, because the kneecap is encased in the tendon of the quad. And if your quads are tight, if you pull your quads really tight and then try to move your kneecap, it's not going to wiggle. This is just the way anatomy works here. So if your kneecaps are always up, it means your quads are always on. And that's because we're shifted our pelvis forward and we're standing on the front of our feet, and we have to catch ourselves as we're moving forward. So your hips back over the heels alignment is going to help you find a more relaxed quad so that your kneecaps could drop down towards your feet and relax. So I'm going to put my fingers right around this kneecap, and I'm going to turn my quad on and then turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. Let me stand up and show you that too. So my fingers are around my kneecap, and when my quad pulls it up, it goes up like this. When my quad relaxes, it comes down. This could take you a while to find this movement, and it's not uncommon for one to be a little bit different than the other. See if you can relax your legs, keep them straight, and find some movement, either manual and then active in your kneecaps. And where you want your kneecaps to be most of the time is to be able to relax downward. That is, to have nice, relaxed quad muscles. Try it.